Am I Racist broke records in theaters as the decade's #1 documentary. Now it's streaming on DailyWire Plus with exclusive extras. You got to go to dailywire.com/subscribe. Use code Trump. Get 47% off your new annual membership today. In the wake of President Trump's landslide victory, the establishment press is crumbling. We're talking mass layoffs. We are talking major reporting errors. We are talking a ratings collapse, all of which gives the Trump administration a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the White House press office to reset the relationship between the Republican Party and the media. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. Welcome back to the show. The Massachusetts governor, the liberal Massachusetts governor, says that she will not assist the Trump administration with deportations. Just wait until you see what our new wonderful border czar has to say about that. We'll get to that in one moment. First, though, I want to tell you about ExpressVPN. Go to expressvpn.com/Knowles. Think about everything you've browsed, searched for, watched, or tweeted. Now, imagine all of those data being collected by data brokers into a permanent public record, your record. To keep my data private when I go online, I turn to ExpressVPN. Big tech companies, federal agencies, and data brokers are constantly tracking your every move online, building profiles about you and selling your private information to the highest bidder. That is why I use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides my IP address, making it virtually impossible for these digital surveillance states to track and monetize my online activity. But it is not just about privacy from big tech. ExpressVPN encrypts 100% of your network traffic, protecting you from hackers when you're working from your local coffee shop or traveling. Super easy to use. Just one tap on any of your devices and you are protected. Right now, you can take advantage of ExpressVPN's Black Friday Cyber Monday offer to get the absolute best VPN deal you'll find all year. ExpressVPN.com/Knowles. Get 4 extra months for free with the 12-month plan, or 6 extra months with the 24-month plan totally free. ExpressVPN.com/Knowles. Get an extra 4 or even 6 months of ExpressVPN for free. Okay, before we get into any of these broader news stories, we have to do a catch-up on the Trump nominees. Trump is moving really fast, picking his cabinet secretaries, picking senior staff. I think he is doing a phenomenal job at that. We covered a few of them yesterday, but there are some wild picks that came in last night as I was flying back in from Iowa into Nashville. Top one, Secretary of State, is Marco Rubio. I'd mentioned on the show yesterday that the 3 big options for Secretary of State were Bill Hagerty here, the senator from Tennessee, former ambassador to Japan under Trump, Rick Grinnell, former acting DNI under Trump, former ambassador to Germany, and Marco Rubio, obviously senator from Florida. And I pointed out that you can't really go wrong with those choices. I think there were other names that were up for consideration that might have given conservatives more pause. But of those 3 guys, I thought they were all pretty solid. They had different strengths generally. Of the 3, Rubio's probably the most, what would you call him, new right or common good conservative or all around kind of traditional conservative. So some people are going to have issue with Marco Rubio on various votes he's taken in the Senate. One example that dogged him during the 2016 presidential run when he ran for president was that he had voted for a kind of amnesty package in his early days in the Senate. So people are going to say, I don't know if we trust Marco Rubio. But as I've pointed out with some of the other nominees, whatever weaknesses a candidate might have on this vote or this thing he said, if you look at the roles that these people are being put into, they don't really seem to matter. Okay, Marco Rubio some years ago took a vote that was a little weaker on immigration than conservatives would like. Okay, but how would that affect his position as Secretary of State? He's not going to be having any say over the border. Trump already put the border czar in, and the border czar is extremely hardcore and is exactly the kind of guy you'd want him in charge of deportations. For Marco Rubio, in Secretary of State, I think he's actually a really good pick. Now, down from there, we've got Mike Huckabee next came in. He's the pick for the ambassador to Israel. This is a great choice. There is basically no one in America who has a better relationship with the state of Israel than Mike Huckabee does. He's an all-around great guy, conservative, loyal to Trump. Obviously, his daughter was President Trump's press secretary. Then his daughter, Sarah, is now the governor of Arkansas. That was after Mike Huckabee was the governor of Arkansas, a very, very solid conservative who's been on the national scene since he ran for president in 2008. Obviously, good choice for ambassador to Israel. Then we have the big one that is making the libs' heads completely explode. That would be Pete Hegseth for Secretary of Defense. Now, if you're not familiar with Pete, you probably are familiar with Pete, but if you're not, Pete is one of the hosts on the Fox News morning show, Fox and Friends. I've known Pete for years. He's got a really great background. He's got, I think, a couple of Bronze Stars. He's a combat veteran. He's a graduate of Princeton and Harvard. And he's been very successful on TV and in conservative media and in spreading conservative ideas. So this is making the libs' heads explode because they're saying, well, this man, he's never even worked for a defense contractor. He's never worked as a lobbyist for the military-industrial complex. This man can't be the Secretary of State. What qualifications does Pete Hegseth have for Secretary of Defense, rather? What qualifications does he have? And I thought, well, I don't know. Combat vet, served in the military for many years, graduate of 2 prestigious universities. He ran a nonprofit for veterans, I believe. He's run for office before. What's the problem? I don't really see what the problem is. Is the problem that he's young? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. I think that's a strength. But then the problem, the reason that anyone is criticizing the Pete Hegseth nomination is because he's also good on TV. That's it. They're saying, what is this TV host doing in the cabinet? Do you guys remember Trump was a TV host, right? You remember that? You know, being a TV host, being able to communicate on camera, that's actually a strength in politics. Ronald Reagan was once asked if an actor could be the president. And he said, how could the president not be an actor? And he's absolutely right about that. A chief part of your job in politics is to communicate with people. The fact that you've got a guy with a serious military pedigree, with a serious base of political knowledge, who also happens to be a good communicator, that seems like an ideal pick for Secretary of Defense. So anyway, Pete's going to do great in the job. I think that's fabulous. I am elated to hear that news. Then you go to Department of Homeland Security. You've got Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota. Here, some people are wondering, is Kristi Noem, does she have the tough enough stuff for DHS? Again, she was pretty tough during COVID. Let's not forget, she was one of the few governors that was skeptical of the mass lockdowns. If she treats the cartel criminals at the border the way that she wrote about that dog in her memoir, then, we're going to be in a good position. But even furthermore, if you think, okay, I don't know, she's a little too moderate or something to be at the border, again, I don't really see evidence of that. Don't forget, we already have a border czar. We have Homan at the border who's going to be in charge of the deportations. So for DHS, it's a broader department, and Kristi Noem is a good communicator. She's good on TV. She's been loyal to Trump. Seems like a fine pick to me. White House counsel William McGinley is getting plaudits all around from conservative lawyers with credibility. John Ratcliffe for CIA director. He was former director of national intelligence. He's also a former Texas congressman. Seems fine to me. And then another favorite pick for people, that would be the new 2 leaders of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. That would be Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Killer choice. Love it. It's awesome. We knew that Elon was going to be put in charge of some kind of cost-cutting program in the government. Elon came out and he said that the government is too bloated. There are way too many departments. They have overlapping responsibilities. It's completely ridiculous. Elon was going to come in and cut a big chunk out of the federal budget. Now, some people asked, does Elon Musk really have time to do this? He's running the biggest, most exciting car company in the world, and he's launching rocket ships and catching them with new technology, and he wants to colonize Mars. He's running X, one of the major social media platforms. The guy's got a lot on his plate. He's got a lot of kids. Does he have time to do this? And so he's sharing the role with one of the most exciting figures to appear in the Republican Party and the conservative movement in decades, Vivek Ramaswamy, extremely intelligent guy, like Elon, extremely intelligent, extremely successful, extremely ambitious. And furthermore, think about this brilliance. I go right back to the point I was making earlier about some of the nominees. Some people are going to say, oh, I don't know if I agree with this nominee on this issue. Bobby Kennedy, I don't know, he might be a little tough on energy and natural gas and oil. But what does Trump say? When Trump goes out and he says, hey, we're going to unleash Bobby Kennedy on Big Pharma. We're going to unleash Bobby Kennedy on the FDA. He says, but we're not going to unleash him on the oil industry. Hey, I agree with Bobby on this stuff, but I don't agree with him on that stuff. And so we're going to focus on the stuff we agree on. And so many of Trump's picks, okay, they're a little wishy-washy on this issue or that issue. So Trump puts them into an area where they have responsibilities in the areas of agreement and the areas where they're really strong. So there's one disagreement between Vivek and some of the rest of Trump's team, which is that Vivek is more in favor of free trade. He's a little more skeptical of tariffs. He's a little bit more classically liberal. And a lot on Trump's team are pro-tariff. They're a little more pro-protectionist, a little more traditionally conservative. Okay, so what better place to put Vivek Ramaswamy than in the Department of Government Efficiency, where the job is to cut away at that fat and the bureaucracy. That's not just blubber, that's not just inefficient, but it's actually corrosive and corrupting. Great, that's exactly the guy you want to unleash there. And who better to partner up with Elon Musk, who's one of the smartest, most impressive men in the world, than Vivek Ramaswamy, who's extremely smart, who's extremely successful, who comes from the world of business. I think the picks are just fantastic. And there's another point that a friend pointed out to me last night. And this number is going to change as new appointments come in. But my friend pointed out the average age of Trump's cabinet, if taken together with some of the other top picks, is 47. That's the average age. The average age of Joe Biden's cabinet, according to Brookings Institution, was 59. On average, a dozen years older than the Trump cabinet. This is shaping up to be a young administration, which I think is really, really smart. I visited Hungary twice last year. I was giving a speech in Esztergom, and then I also visited Budapest again after that. And I got to tour around and speak with some members of the government. And something that impressed me was the Orban government, probably the most successful right-wing government in Europe. Not just probably, it definitely is, and by a lot. It's a young government. They put young people in who were competent, who were educated, who were energetic, who were in tune with the present state of politics, who were not beholden and imprisoned by decrepit ideologies that no longer really apply. I think Trump is doing exactly the same thing here, which gives President Trump a massive opportunity to reset the relationship between citizens and the government, and to reset the relationship between conservatives and the press, the fourth branch of the government, which has become so corrupt in recent years. We'll get to that in one moment. First, though, I want to tell you about First Liberty Institute. Go to supremecoup.com/Knowles. There's a looming threat to our constitutional republic that the mainstream media will not cover. The radical left is plotting a Supreme Court coup, and they're not even trying to hide it. These progressive ideologues want to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing it with their own hand-picked justices. With a simple majority vote, a president's signature, their plan becomes reality. We've already seen their playbook: made-up ethical attacks on justices, illegal protests at their homes, and open threats from so-called representatives. It is Venezuela-style court packing. It would spell the end of judicial independence and the rule of law as we know it. But there is hope. First Liberty is leading the charge to protect the Supreme Court from this radical plan. They are fighting to preserve the legitimacy of the court and the separation of powers that safeguards our freedoms. Do not let them Venezuela your United States. Things are looking good for right now, but all that can change in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. Right now, go to supremecoup.com/Knowles, K-N-O-W-L-E-S. That is supremecoup, COUP.com/KNOWLES. Learn how you can help stop the left's takeover of the Supreme Court. The future of our country is in your hands. Check out supremecoup.com/Knowles today. Before we get into the massive opportunity that Trump has here with the press, let's not brush over his opportunity with the government. Here is Elon sitting down with Tucker talking about his ambitions for how to trim back the federal government.
I kind of like DOGE. It's more fun. Where we just take a look at all the federal agencies and say, do we really need whatever it is, 428 federal agencies? Like, if there's so many that people have never even heard of, and that have overlapping areas of responsibility, we should, I don't know, probably we should get. I mean, there are more federal agencies than there are years since the establishment of the United States, which means that we've created more than one federal agency per year on average. That seems a lot.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. So we should have, that seems crazy. I think we should be able to get away with 99 agencies. I don't know. That seems a lot like a lot of agencies.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
2 per state. That's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. We should have fewer agencies, and they certainly shouldn't have overlapping responsibilities. And then we need some kind of, we just need a review of regulations to say which ones are sensible and which ones are not.
I love the way Elon's talking about this. He's not talking about this like some nerdy ideologue at a think tank with some white paper. He's just saying, we have more agencies than years the country's been around. We have 428. Seems like a lot. So I'd like to get it down to, 99? Doesn't that seem like, he's not, why does he say 99? Because that seems like a lot, doesn't it? That seems just common sense. Just common sense. To me, this is the common sense administration. This was the common sense election. This election brought in people who had differing ideologies, if they had any ideology at all, but they did have one thing in common, which was some sense of the common sense. This was the subject of my speech at the University of Iowa, which is on YouTube. It's on the Young America's Foundation YouTube channel. To go from 428 to 99, by my calculation, means that Elon wants to cut 329 federal agencies, which to me sounds like a good start. Seems like a really, really great idea. Now, I want to get back to the media. Trump is very clearly resetting the relationship between the citizen and the government, and he's doing it fast. What about the relationship between the citizen and the media, specifically conservative citizens, Republicans, and the media? There was a story I told you about, I guess it was yesterday on the show. A FEMA supervisor told, according to documents that were obtained by the DailyWire first, a FEMA supervisor told employees and volunteers not to provide disaster relief to Trump supporters after Hurricane Milton. So this was demonstrable. We have the documents. Said if there is a Trump sign, do not go and provide disaster relief. This vindicated a claim that Trump had made just weeks earlier after Hurricane Helene, when President Trump said that FEMA, that disaster agencies, were not providing support to Trump supporters. The New York Times followed that up with a fact check that said, Trump is lying here. There is no evidence whatsoever that FEMA is not providing relief and not helping out Trump supporters. Fake news, fact check, 300,000 Pinocchios. Then this document comes out and says, well, hold on. Now we have proof that was happening in Hurricane Milton. So the last little shred of credibility that the libs could hold on to was they could say, well, Trump made the claim about Hurricane Helene. This incident that you have documents on that DailyWire acquired, that was Hurricane Milton. That was separate. This is an isolated incident. This is not a systemic problem. This is being corrected. The employee in question has been fired. Okay, well, the employee in question has now given an interview and contradicted all of those liberal fake news reports, because she says that avoiding the homes of Trump supporters was a policy. It was standard operating procedure. It had been going on not just in Florida during Hurricane Milton, but much more widely.
I was notified after I demobbed. The next morning, they told me verbally I was fired, but they never provided me anything in writing stating that I was fired. They all alleged that these actions were made on my own recognizances and that it was for my own political advances. However, if you look at the record, there is what we call a community trend. And unfortunately, it just so happened that the political hostility that was encountered by my team, and I was on 2 different teams during this deployment, they just so happened to have the Trump campaign signage. FEMA always preaches avoidance first and then de-escalation. So this is not isolated. This is a colossal event of avoidance, not just in the state of Florida, but you will find avoidance in the Carolinas. Senior leadership will lie to you and tell you that they do not know. But if you ask the DSA crew leads and specialists what they are experiencing in the field, they will tell you. Demand for FEMA to give you those incident reports. They will substantiate what is happening to us in the field.
Demand that FEMA give you those reports. This is not an isolated event. This is happening in the Carolinas. That means it's happening during Hurricane Helene. It's coming from higher-ups at FEMA. This means that President Trump is 100% vindicated yet again. He already was, in my view, vindicated in principle when what he claimed about Hurricane Helene was proven with Hurricane Milton, which followed just on the heels of Helene. But now, according to the fired FEMA supervisor in question, it was going on in Hurricane Helene too. And it's actually a broader policy from FEMA to discriminate in disaster relief against Trump supporters. The fake news completely blown out of the water yet again. Totally proven wrong, all the way up to the New York Times. Which brings us to President Trump's opportunity here. Once in a generation opportunity. This is an opportunity specifically for the White House press office to radically change the way that conservatives and just normal people broadly interact with the media. It's not as though the White House press office has been around since George Washington, okay? It's a relatively recent creation. It really only took on prominence a little bit into the 20th century. The way that it operates has changed over the decades, as it necessarily must, as any institution must, and the time for change in the White House press office is now. We'll get to that in one moment. First, though, I want to tell you about my friend Kirk Cameron. If you don't know Kirk personally, as I do, you can get to know him. You can find out which of us knows the other better with our latest Yes or No game.
Kamala Harris is black.
That's going to get me into trouble.
I keep getting conflicting reports.
You know? What time is it? What day is it? The politically correct version of this episode that is permitted on social media platforms is available now on the Michael Knowles YouTube channel. However, you can see the full uncensored episode with 3 questions that were too spicy for certain big tech platforms exclusively for members on DailyWire Plus. Go to dailywire.com/shop to get the all-new Yes or No Politics, Philosophy, and Religion expansion pack today for the perfect stocking stuffer gift. CNN is planning massive layoffs. CNN already had massive layoffs over the summer. CNN is planning another round of massive layoffs. This will affect not just behind the curtains employees, but also employees in production, also potentially some of the big stars at CNN. Why is that? Because CNN's ratings have collapsed. In 2016, CNN averaged 13.3 million viewers in primetime. Today, it's just 800,000 viewers in primetime. Chris Wallace, big talent from Fox, had left Fox, goes over to CNN. Chris Wallace has just left CNN. And he's leaving CNN saying that podcasting and streaming is where it's at. That's where the conversations are happening now. That's where influence is had in media now. Cable news is old and dying. So Chris Wallace is leaving now that his contract is up. Others might be leaving CNN willingly or unwillingly. There will be massive layoffs. There is a media shift that is happening, and the Trump election is exacerbating that to some degree because the establishment media have been so corrupt. They've lost so much credibility in the lies that they've told specifically about President Trump, but more broadly about conservatives and Republicans. That's all true. The fact that President Trump's interview on Joe Rogan is easily the most significant media event of the last 10, 15 years, easily, no question about it, I think is proof of this. But you take this even beyond the Trump election. The media were already heading in this direction. Cable news was already dying. Cable news has been dying for 10 years, more than 10 years. There's been a long way for cable news to fall. There's been a long way for print newspapers to fall. There's been a long way even for terrestrial radio to fall. So that's, they've been able to maintain some money and power along the way. But it's been falling for a long time. The new media, podcasting, streaming, platforms like the DailyWire have been gaining traction steadily, sometimes exponentially, for many years now. That's just happening. That's not just a Trump thing. It's not just because the media have squandered their credibility. It's also a technology thing. It's just how the media have developed. The next White House press secretary should take these new circumstances into account. This is a generational opportunity. The press has been one of the most persistent problems for conservatives and Republicans and normal people for decades now, because the press have lied with impunity. The press have defamed people. The press have spread hoaxes and told lies. And then after the lies have their consequence, weeks and months later, they'll maybe issue a correction, but they'll run the story above the fold on page 1 and they'll run the correction on page 2073 where nobody sees it. And they get away with this time and time again. And it has taken down good people, and it has impeded good policy, and it has stymied the desires of voters who are supposed to have some control over our government. It's been a big problem, and we now have an opportunity, thanks to the development of technology and thanks to the way that the press have beclowned themselves, specifically in the face of Donald Trump. We have an opportunity right now to reset that relationship. Look at this chart. Here's a chart. This is just the chart as of 2022 for the White House briefing room. I can't find a more recent chart published online, but look at the names that are on this chart. You got front row A, NBC, Fox, CBS, AP, ABC News, Reuters, CNN. Okay, left and right, a number of these players are going to stay, but CNN doesn't get any ratings. Why would CNN be in the front row? That doesn't make any sense to me. Next row. You look at NPR. NPR consistently lies about Trump. NPR is subsidized by taxpayers. How are NPR's ratings? I don't know. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, second row. USA Today, New York Times, also Washington Post. The Washington Post and the New York Times ran hit pieces within the last few weeks. The New York Times ran a hit piece with my face as the center of it, and the Washington Post ran a hit piece on Ben. But both of which pointed out that podcasts and streaming and the new media are totally eating the old establishment media's lunch. So you got the Washington Post and the New York Times admitting that the people with influence are the podcasters, the new media companies, the streamers. Okay, well then why are the Washington Post and the New York Times sitting there in the second row? Doesn't make any sense to me. Especially when you take into account that the Washington Post and the New York Times consistently lie with impunity. I mean, just to use the example of that story, the New York Times runs this piece, says election misinformation, election falsehoods flying around YouTube with no consequence. My picture, my face is the center of that. And then I said, what falsehood are they calling me out on? Why? I've been precise in my language. What would they get me on? And the answer is nothing. They don't quote me once in the article. They don't mention me in the article. They just put my face front and center because they don't like my podcast and they view us as competition and they want to kick us off YouTube. They want to pressure big tech to censor the conservatives. That is egregious journalistic malpractice. The next White House press secretary, I think, should seriously consider revoking the New York Times' pass, period. Full stop. For the specific misdeeds that the New York Times has committed, and as an example to the rest of the press, that we're not going to tolerate this anymore. This monopoly over communication that the press has been able to amass in recent years, and the grave injustices that they have committed with that monopoly. USA Today, I don't know. USA Today still has relatively wide distribution. How's their track record on accountability? I don't know. I'm not saying kick them out of the briefing room entirely. Should they be in the second row, though? Next one, Politico, LA Times. Okay. Oh, then hold on. Row D here, we've got MSNBC. MSNBC barely exists anymore. Within the next month, MSNBC might not even exist. They're in row D. I mean, look, we could go on and on through all of the Huffington Post. When was the last time anyone read the Huffington Post? Give me a break. This doesn't make sense. Joe Rogan should be in the front row. Now, Joe Rogan has other things to do. He's probably not going to be sitting in a White House briefing all day. But you see my point. Maybe Joe Rogan sends a representative, a reporter. Maybe Timcast has a seat in the front row. Maybe. My point is, this chart doesn't make any sense, both from the perspective of the credibility of the outlets sitting there, but also from the perspective of influence, even for the basic purpose of the White House press office, which is to communicate what is happening within the government to the people. That has not happened. We've had mission drift here, folks. That is not what occurs here. Instead, what this briefing exists for now is for dishonest leftist reporters with waning influence, if they have any influence at all, to try to spread lies about the government. We can't have that. Okay, these kinds of technological changes, these kinds of media changes, don't happen all the time. Nothing like this has happened in our lifetime. And as President Trump's administration is obviously dynamic, it's obviously energetic, it is young, President Trump is ready to go in there and break things that need to be broken. Well, I think this is a key area of responsibility and a key opportunity. This is a real legacy move for President Trump, who's already cemented his legacy as the second in American history a president to be elected to a non-consecutive second term. Much more impressive than Cleveland in the fact that Trump was able to do that while being prosecuted, while Democrats were trying to kick him off the ballot, while liberals were trying to assassinate him. President Trump managed to do that. Okay, great. Well, let's do it, baby. Let's go all the way. Let's go all the way. This could be truly one of the pivotal presidencies in American history. Now, speaking of silly reporters, Mayor Adams in New York was just asked a question. And Mayor Adams, Eric Adams, is a Democrat. But he's a Democrat who breaks with the extreme liberals. He's the mayor of New York, so he has to recognize issues like illegal immigration are really hurting him. As Adams pointed out, he said illegal immigration could destroy New York City. So now Trump is elected. He appoints this great border czar who is promising to carry out deportations. Democrat mayors and governors are saying, we will not comply, we will not comply. Eric Adams says, I'm open to working with the federal government.
Will you express concern about mass deportations in the city?
My concern is one concern, and we keep tinkering around the edges. We keep having this philosophical conversation about it. The voters communicated loudly and clearly. We have a broken immigration system. It needs to be fixed. That's the only conversation I want. New York City was devastated by that broken system. 220,000 migrants and asylum seekers have made their way here.
How can migrant New Yorkers be sure that they won't happen here, given that ICE can make arrests in New York City without police cooperation? Why should New Yorkers, including migrant New Yorkers, trust that you will advocate for them with the new Trump administration?
But you said, how can I advocate for New Yorkers? So I should only advocate for one type of New Yorker or all New Yorkers?
Oh, listen to this lexical prison that this reporter is trying to trap Mayor Adams in and trying to trap us all in. So what are you going to say to migrant New Yorkers? Hold on, put a pause here. What's a migrant New Yorker? I'm a New Yorker by birth and by upbringing. I have immigrants, legal immigrants in my family line. What do you mean by a migrant New Yorker? You're not talking about someone who came here legally. You're talking about someone who broke the law, crossed our border illegally, or overstayed a visa, and is now living in our country against our laws. How's that person a New Yorker? How is a Venezuelan migrant who worked with Tren de Aragua or MS-13 to cross our border illegally, who's in debt to the cartel, who's a gangster, who's committing all sorts of crimes, who doesn't speak English, who doesn't know the Statue of Liberty from the Empire State Building? How is that person a New Yorker in any way? It's not a New Yorker. He's a foreigner. He's a foreign national and a criminal who's here illegally, who needs to be deported. That's what he is. But what about the migrant New Yorkers? It's the same. This is the new version of undocumented American. What's an undocumented American? You mean not an American? That's what that means. But it's these lexical prisons. This is something that I think Trump is really, really good at. And I think that the Trump administration, specifically the people dealing with the press, need to be good at. They need to recognize that language it's not neutral. This is the subject of my book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds, available now, #1 national bestseller. Thank you very much. It's not neutral, okay? These terms don't merely color the way we view the world. They actually constitute the way that we view the world. An undocumented American or a migrant New Yorker has every right to be in America and New York respectively, because they're Americans and New Yorkers. But on the contrary, an illegal alien has no right to be in America, has no right to be in New York. They're foreigners who are here illegally. The words that we use are going to totally color, not just color, they're going to constitute how we view the world. And if the Trump administration really carries out these deportations, which I hope and trust will occur, the press is going to go into overdrive. That little interview you heard there with Mayor Adams, that is a little amuse-bouche of what you're going to see. The poor dreamer, undocumented American, migrant American, New Yorker, wonderful dreamers are being deported by the heartless, cruel. And everyone knows that this has to be done. The Democrat mayor of New York knows this has to be done. But can we overcome the corrupt institutions that have prevented the enforcement of our law for so many decades? Am I racist? The biggest documentary of the decade was in theaters. Now it is an Academy Award submitted movie, and it is streaming exclusively on DailyWire Plus. If you saw Am I Racist in theaters, you are a part of history, but there's even more waiting for you. Catch a deleted scene featuring the beloved children's book character, Johnny the Walrus, plus exclusive behind-the-scenes footage showing exactly how we pulled it all off. The only way to see it is with a DailyWire Plus membership. If you are not a member yet, now is the time. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe, use code Trump to get 47% off a new annual membership, and you can see an Academy Award submitted movie on DailyWire Plus. My favorite comment yesterday is from T. Rexness, who says, I wish Trump would have picked a more libertarian end the UN type of person for UN ambassador. Our government shouldn't even be involved with the UN. Well, it's funny you say that. We did, in recent memory, have that kind of UN ambassador, and that was John Bolton. I remember once I was speaking to another former UN ambassador, and I said, one of us at this lunch asked if you have to support the UN in order to be UN ambassador. And this former official said, yes, I think so, unless you're John Bolton. You know, John Bolton went out there. He said to the UN, I think you could destroy multiple floors of the UN building in New York, wouldn't change a thing. The UN is a joke, and we will work with it when it is in America's national interest, but we will ignore it when it's not in America's national interest. So what's just a little ironic is that many people who don't like John Bolton now would call for that kind of rhetoric. And Trump, however, Trump did hire John Bolton to be his national security advisor as a way, as he says, to kind of spook foreign adversaries, to have a team that on the surface seemed incoherent, but it was really in furtherance of an effective grand strategy. So in this case, President Trump wants to be maybe a little bit more diplomatic, but still have a pretty tough lady out there. So I trust his picks. I think his picks broadly, certainly since the first round in 2017, I think his picks have been really quite good. Okay. Some Democrats don't want to play ball. Eric Adams wants to deport some do not. Maura Healy, governor of Massachusetts, says she will not comply.
If the Trump administration requests it, would the Massachusetts State Police assist in mass deportations?
No, absolutely not. But let me say this. I do think it's important that we all recognize that there's going to be a lot of pressure on states and state officials. And I can assure you, we're going to work really hard to deliver. Some realities also need to be, noted. And that is, in 2016, we had a very different situation in the courts. And while I'm sure there may be litigation ahead, there's a lot of other ways that people are going to act and need to act for the sake of their states and their residents. There's regulatory authority and executive powers and the like. There's legislation also within our states. So I think that the key here is that every tool in the toolbox has got to be used to protect our citizens, to protect our residents, and protect our states, and certainly to hold the line on democracy and the rule of law as a basic principle, right?
Yeah. So we're just not we're gonna use our power in the states. We are not going to go along with the federal government. Okay. Send in the feds would be my take. You got a governor of a state who is actively undermining federal law, specifically federal law that was at the top of the priority list for voters who just overwhelmingly voted in people who want to enforce federal law. Okay. Send in the feds. Happily, that appears to be the position of the new border czar.
Some of these Democratic governors say they're going to stand in the way. They're going to make it hard for us. Well, a suggestion: if you're not going to help us, get the hell out of the way, but we're going to do it. So if we can't get assistance from New York City, and we may have to double the number of agents we send to New York City, because we're going to do the job. We're going to do the job without you or with you. But it's much easier to arrest a bad guy. Like I just said, we're concentrating on public safety threats of human and national security threats. Right. It's much easier to arrest a bad guy in the jail. Give us access to Rikers Island that we've been kicked out of. Let us get the bad guy in the jail. It's safer for the alien. It's safer for the officer. It's safer for the community.
Get him out. Get him out. That's what you got to do. I think this guy, if you went to central casting and you said, hey, give me the perfect man to run the deportations, I think this is probably the guy that you would be dealing with. Of course you have to do that. Of course. It's the only way we can have a country. The only way we can have a country is if we can enforce national laws. If it is not possible to enforce national laws, including the most basic national laws, like the laws pertaining to our border, the very thing that delineates our country, if you can't do that, then you effectively do not have a country. You have a hodgepodge of states, and really what you have is a kind of blobbish, liberal establishment that selectively enforces national laws, but selectively refuses to enforce them. You have some, you have some kind of mush, but you don't have a country. That guy seems to me the man for the job. So you know what this is going to cue? This is going to cue the laments from the press about the destruction of norms, standards and norms that this Trump administration is blindly refusing to acknowledge. Okay, MSNBC, take it away.
So the tension you described that the New York Times reported on within the transition team was described to us as a battle between the normies and the crazies, although, of course, the people we're talking about would disagree with that characterization. We focused on a couple of lawyers. One's named Mike Davis. He's a very conservative, kind of a bomb-throwing provocateur who used to clerk for Justice Neil Gorsuch. He's an advisor to the transition team, and he has been out there publicly saying that Donald Trump should prosecute people like the Attorney General Tish James and Jack Smith, the special counsel, that his Justice Department should do that. He's actually articulating which crimes they should be prosecuted for, and he's making no bones about that, laying the legal groundwork. Now, the thing about that is that would violate 5 decades of norms post-Watergate, which said that the Justice Department should be independent from the president, that the president should never say, go investigate that person. These people are suggesting that Donald Trump should be able to do that with his Justice Department. And as a legal matter, they're right. We're talking about norms here.
Okay, so legally, Trump is totally right, of course. But as a matter of norms, it would be so wrong of the Trump administration to maybe take a peek into the woman who was prosecuting the former president and current leader of the opposition. Don't you think that defied norms a little bit more egregiously than Trump having the DOJ maybe take a peek into massive corruption in New York, an already very corrupt state government? Don't you think trying to imprison the former president, like we're some banana republic, some tin pot dictatorship, trying to imprison the then current leader of the political opposition who became the nominee and then who was elected president, don't you think that might upend norms in a bit more of a dangerous way than having the DOJ look into crooked New York figures? Joe Biden's DOJ, the federal prosecutors were looking into Eric Adams because he was defying the Trump administration on immigration. Give me a break. And I love they say, ever since Watergate, we've had these norms. Yeah, okay. Ever since the last time the bureaucracy overthrew an extremely popular Republican president based on mostly nonsense. Ever since then, we've had these norms that so benefit the liberals, that the liberals disregard whenever they like, including 5 minutes ago, currently when the Democrats are still trying to prosecute Trump. Yeah, sorry, save me the sob tale. I'm not sure that I can really go along with that. You want to talk about norms. You people have justified the assassination of this man, which almost occurred twice, and left him with a hole in his ear. You want to talk to me about norms. Norms, you people parade naked adults through the streets and you introduce the little kids and you want to tell me about standards and norms? Give me a break. Go pound sand. I can't wait for the Trump administration to hold these people to account so that we can restore actual standards and norms in this country, which we had for a long time until the libs tore them down. Burn those standards to the ground. Now, speaking of burning things to the ground, look, we don't have time. There is so much going on in politics right now that we actually don't have time to get through everything. So I'll just give you a little bit of a tease. President Trump, to begin the process that Elon and Vivek are tasked with achieving of eliminating lots of federal agencies. President Trump is promising to do something that every Republican candidate for president just about in my lifetime has promised to do, and none of them have done it. He wants to begin this process of government efficiency by abolishing the Department of Education, which we'll get to, I guess we'll get to it tomorrow. There's too much going on. Today is Woke Wednesday. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member. Use code Knowles, Knowles, at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans.